Creating a chart in Excel, which is nothing other than a visual representation of numeric data, is surprisingly easy, and you can quickly embellish it with a variety of visual effects. And let's be clear, the term we use is chart. You might call it a graph, but officially and formally in Excel, we talk about charts. And we're about to create one with this set of data right here, starting in columns D through I. Before creating a chart, highlight the data that you want to show. And it must include some values, otherwise you'll have pretty much of an empty chart. If you do have totals next to your data, leave them off. Totals and details don't work so well together. Always include the row that you typically have on top of the data that describes each column, and the column that you typically have on the left side that describes each row. And if you're in a hurry, you can use a great keystroke shortcut combination, Alt F1. That's using the function key F1. Alt F1 immediately creates what we call a clustered column chart. These vertical columns, remind yourself, it's a column chart. And to be a little bit more specific, a clustered column chart. As soon as you see the chart, you might notice at the top of the screen, we've got a new ribbon, Chart Tools, with two contextual tabs, a Design tab, the more important of the two, and a Format tab. Format has a lot to do with fine-tuning of the visuals. Design has some important buttons on it that we'll see. And your eye is probably already attracted to these choices here. I'm sliding over these, not clicking, and we see lots of different variations here. It kind of makes you look like a pro in no time at all. That really stands out. How did you do that? Well, didn't take too long, did it? And there's a drop arrow here, and there's even more of them. So sometimes we'll gravitate toward these. I'll just pick one of these. The black one certainly stands out on the left. I'll click and move that. We can easily change to another one if we wish. To move a chart, you either click and drag any of its borders or just inside the border, move it to where you wish. If you'd like to resize it and keep that same ratio of height to width, point to one of the corner handles, they're called, or also some on the sides. I'm holding down the left mouse button, so I can make this chart narrower or wider, taller, and go anywhere I want. But if I hold down the Shift key, I'm making it bigger or smaller while retaining that same ratio of height to width. And sometimes you want to do that. Let go of the mouse first. If you want the boundaries of the chart to line up with the cell boundaries in the background, take one of these corner handles, hold down the Alt key, let go of the mouse first, and maybe do it from the opposite corner. And not truly necessary, but sometimes you might want to consider doing that. So an Alt drag causes the boundaries of the chart to match up with the cell boundaries in the background. And that's one of many different chart types, as we'll see in the next movie. Now, I've got some other data over here. I'm going to highlight this. If I want a chart on a separate sheet, the keystroke shortcut F11. Keep your eye on the sheet tabs at the bottom. We're currently on the Creating Sheets. We are currently looking at the sheet called Creating Charts in this workbook 07 Charting. As I press the function key F11, suddenly we're on a new sheet and there's a chart. Now we have the same features available with a Design tab, a Format tab, but we're not seeing our data. The advantage could be you're focused strictly on the chart. You're going to make some changes, change the appearance of it, that sort of thing. You're not looking at the data at all, and maybe you'll be printing this or displaying this by itself. I think there's probably a tendency to maybe have the chart next to the data. But either way, I'll go back to Creating Charts, and we've got our data here. A more standard way to create a chart by way of the menu system is, with the data highlighted, we go to the Insert tab in the ribbon. We could start with recommended charts, and I think this is a great button because when you click this, you get some ideas as to how your data could be displayed. Here are 4 examples. And as you see these two, you start to become familiar with some of the names that we see here. So we could pick one of these here. Maybe this one is going to look better. Try that. Looks good. Click OK. And there's a chart. And here too, we might want to resize it. And it's all a question of how many of these charts do you want to have on the same sheet and where do you want to put them. So it's easy to create these. And there's another way to create a chart. When you highlight a list of data that includes numbers like this, what pops up in the lower right-hand corner? This Quick Analysis button. Click it. There's charts, and we see some choices here. And we can go down that path if we wanted to. And there's another way. As you become more familiar with these, you'll go to the Insert tab and pick the chart type that you know you want from the beginning. And there's more about chart types in the next movie. So this is an appealing feature. Keep in mind too, this idea, a chart is always in sync with the data. So on this chart here, this chart that's based on the data over in columns A and B, if the data somehow got recorded incorrectly, And this number for den here should have been 3 million instead of 2 million. I'm going to double click in cell B11 and change that initial 2 to be a 3. And as I press enter, you'll see this den bar to the right here get substantially wider. And there it is. So it's always in sync with the data. It's a good visual representation of the data. And in some cases, you'll see that this works even better when you're dealing with large amounts of data, although often charts are dealing with small amounts. So it's a great feature, relatively easy to use, and it's got tons of options. So anytime you want to display numerical information in a more graphical way, you will be using the chart feature. Excel has many different chart types. You've heard of column charts, bar charts, line charts, and it's not always clear which chart type is going to work best for your data. But it's real easy to make a change. And so when you create a chart, and I'm about to do this with this data right here, I'll do it quickly with that shortcut, Alt F1. There's a chart. That's a clustered column chart, perhaps the most common chart type we see in Excel. But there are many others, and let's consider some options. When a chart is created, it's automatically selected. On the Design tab, change chart type. There are some other kinds of column charts. Here's a stacked column chart. That's cleaner looking, you might say. By reading the height of it, we know the total. It's hard to read the individual colors, though, month to month. We got some other choices out here. Sometimes it's just the visuals. That might get your attention, but is it easy to read? Not quite so easy. But at least we've got some options. And maybe, rather than just looking at column charts, we start exploring some others. Now, we don't necessarily need to see all these. We know what we're trying to show here. Why not? Bar chart. There we go. That looks pretty good. It's the same idea. It's just rotated 90 degrees. And you might just have a personal favorite. Sometimes it's completely subjective. One thing I do recommend, though, when you create a chart is to use this button here called Switch Row Column. And the description doesn't quite give you any indication as to how it's really going to look. So click it anyway. Before you do it, though, notice each cluster here of bars is about a furniture item. And the colors differentiate the regions. Switch row column, and now the colors are about the furniture item, and the clusters are about the region. Go back and forth. Sometimes when you do this, you say, well, both of those are pretty attractive. Well, you could have them both on the screen if you want. And if you do want to do that, chart selected, you can duplicate it with Control D, D for duplicate, and change one of them. We got that. Different clustering. And that works with column charts and line charts as well. Now, if you are dealing with data that covers a time frame, like the data here, a line chart tends to work best. I'm going to create this time by going to the Insert tab in the ribbon, and I know I want a line chart, so I could go right here, Insert Line. There it is. The fourth option tends to work best if you want to get markers. And there it is. And this indicates a trend month by month. When you see a line chart, nearly always across the bottom, you'll see some time frame. If you switch row column here, that's not so good at all. Usually with line charts, there's a clear favorite as you look at these. Now, the examples we've seen so far have not been dealing with a lot of data, and that's often the case. But farther down on the same worksheet is about a 2.5-year list of sales here. Alt F1, column chart. That's not bad. We can make a case for that. But on the other hand, change chart type, make this be a line chart. I think this is going to look better. Do be alert to this idea, though. With line charts, if you make them wider and maybe not as tall, it tends to flatten out the data. And if you're trying to hide an increasing trend, well, that might be one way to do it. Now, without changing the source data whatsoever, I'm going to make this be a lot taller. And we get this effect. So be alert to that idea. You can change the meaning of a chart just by changing its size, particularly with a line chart. Also, when you're changing chart type and you do have time, and you've got different kinds of data at different times, consider what an area chart might look like. Not a good choice here. Some of these other choices, what's a tree map chart? Would that work here? Well, it might. You might explore that a little bit. Sunburst. So lots of different chart types. And the more you work with charts, the more you will change the chart type. There's so many different options, and some data just looks better with one kind of a chart versus another kind. It's a feature that you can easily manipulate and work with as you work with charts. Excel for Office 365 has a valuable new feature. It's an analytical tool, and it's called Ideas, a feature introduced in previous versions of Office 365 and originally called Insights. The feature was enhanced and renamed in late 2018 as Ideas, and it's located on the Home tab. Far right button. As we slide over the button, we see the description. It is a preview feature, meaning it will be upgraded at different times. Discover more about your data. Ideas looks for patterns in your data that it can use to create intelligent, personalized suggestions. For the most part, we're likely to see suggestions that are either charts or pivot charts. On this worksheet called Ideas in our Chapter 7 charting file, we've got data in columns A through G. This is transaction type data. It's about 900 rows. We can either highlight it all, but since it is surrounded by empty cells and worksheet boundaries, we can simply click within it. And then as we click the Ideas button, Excel will analyze all that contiguous data and give us some ideas. Get used to the idea that not all these are going to be perfect. In fact, the first one here doesn't look like it's going to be very useful at all. The next one certainly is, though. I know at a glance now, and I might not even necessarily want to pursue this any further, but I see clearly we've sold more televisions than clothes washers. If we want to keep this information more prominently, what do we see below? Insert. Now, often it will be a pivot chart, sometimes just a regular chart. Let's click this. We're about to see a new sheet. And there it is. And there's a pivot chart right there. You can move it around. Maybe you've never worked with them before, but here's a pivot chart. There's the summary data off to the left based on the information that we saw on the other sheet. It's a crowded screen for the moment. I'm going to close this dialog box here and then go back to the ideas sheet because there's some other choices out there to the right too. Notice the scroll bar. We can scroll down. The next one, I'm not so sure that I'd be interested in that. It says items and amount appear highly correlated. Okay, well, that's good. But if I want this, I can insert the chart as well. This is not a pivot chart, and get some visual analysis of the data. Farther down, we're noticing something else, maybe a bit unusual and something maybe we just want to observe and move on. For the salesperson, Bill Babowski, and the customer, Electro City, that's a minimum number of items sold for whatever reason. But what do we see below this? Show all 35 results. Click it, and we see some more choices. And the scroll bar becomes active on the right side. We can start to scroll down, see some other choices. For the customer Electro City, amount has outliers, some unusually high or unusually low numbers. It picks up on those too. And we see some other analysis below that as well too. One of these salespersons here has sold more televisions than anything else, which may or may not be unusual. But we're getting, pardon the pun perhaps, ideas about how we might analyze the data. And lots of choices here. One of these persons here has noticeably higher amounts based on working with one customer or another. And we see some other choices as well too. Now, closing the dialog box, I'm going to click into this middle set of data here. This is about 700 rows of data, HR type data. Again, I'm not sure what I might get out of this, but let's click that Ideas button again. And off to the right, we begin to see some other choices. Years by building probably wouldn't be very interesting. That job rating, not so much either. On this one, I'm not seeing much so far with the first 4 choices, but let's show all 37 results and head down that path too, eventually, of looking at some of these others, seeing which of these are going to work with our data or make sense to us. And undoubtedly, you'll be getting some ideas here. Now, you probably would have known if you know the data well, but maybe you didn't. Full-time accounts for the majority of compensation. That's probably true in many organizations, but not necessarily all. So we begin to see lots of different opportunities here. Outliers again, notice here. And there's other data on this worksheet. I'll click back within the worksheet, scroll to the right. A smaller amount of data. Let's just click in here. Click Ideas, the Ideas button on the Home tab. And we're about to see some more information out here. Insert chart, not a pivot chart. 2 examples here where we're seeing analysis of the data. So one by one, as you use this feature, I think you can begin to say it opens the door to some thoughts, some ideas about this information that I hadn't really thought about perhaps. Or maybe it just gives me the ability to quickly create a chart based on some new analysis that I hadn't thought about. So an ideal feature here called Ideas is found on the Home tab, far right button on the ribbon, a valuable addition to the analytical capability of Excel.